Okay, I am finally doing this. This is going to be a 3-part podcast on the birth of Violet. So part 1 is going to be about preconception and planning to get pregnant. Part 2 is going to be all about my pregnancy with Violet. And part 3 is going to be about the birth. So my daughter, Violet, is now 8 years old. I've been saying for a couple of years now since I started this podcast that I need to share this story. Preconception care, pregnancy, positive birth experiences, working through birth trauma are all topics that are really, really close to my heart. It's something that I was really passionate about when I was working with clients as an osteopath, and very much so now in the online space and the work that I do around helping people process their emotions and setting themselves up for experiences that they desire, but also to clear trauma from, in this context, from birth trauma. Clearing emotions from birth trauma. So there's a couple of podcasts that you might want to write down to listen to, and I'll probably mention them throughout as well. But I have also done a podcast answering the question, can you do the emotional work whilst pregnant? And I also did another podcast called My Vipassana Experience, because ultimately, if I jump to what the third podcast is going to be about, which is my birth experience, is that I experienced a painless birth and a lotus birth with Violet, which is not something that I thought was possible. And it's something that I want to share. So I will preface that this should probably have a trigger warning on it, because birth stories can trigger people. And I'm very aware about this. And that is not my intention. So I'm just going to get you to ask yourself and check in with yourself if you are in the space and ready to listen to this, because my experience was positive. And I am going to bring in my clinical experience, my experience as a practitioner, and give some tips as well. I share stuff like this to open your mind as to what's possible, because I know that when I was searching on the internet high and low around how I wanted to do things, that I couldn't find much. And I have also presented in-person workshops with other practitioners in the past, and I've even had some of those friends and practitioners that I've presented with let me know that my story triggers them. So this is something that I've had to learn to hold over time. But also, I really admire and I'm very inspired by those who share their positive experiences. So it's a little bit like this shame. And it is a thing around the birth stories, is that people who have a good experience have a lot of shame around sharing it. But for some reason, the human experience loves to latch onto the negative and get into the pain. So Violet's birthday was on the 1st of October, and I said, I better start recording this because I think I'm going to start losing access to the memories. So for me, this is also documenting a memory, and maybe Violet, you'll get to listen to this one day. So this is part 1. This is about my preconception journey. There's a little bit about my pain story because my health wasn't at the greatest when I thought I wanted to get pregnant. And I now just record my podcasts off the cuff, and I access the information that's available to me here and now. So let's dive into it. I actually have to remember how old I was when I got pregnant. It was 29. So Gav and I had met each other, and Gav actually didn't want kids until he met me. And so we had this conversation, and I think it's great to get things all out in the open and know where one another stands. I was pretty non-fussed about whether or not I would have kids. But when Gav said, actually, I can't remember how that conversation went, but we decided that we wanted to have a baby. And we were very intentional about how we wanted to conceive this baby and when we wanted to conceive this baby and what state of mind. Now, I would love you to go and listen to the podcast of Can You Do Emotional Work Whilst Pregnant? Because the level of work that I do now is not at the level of what I knew back then, obviously, because I've grown and I've evolved since then. But the way I work with clients now is I want to get them way before their preconception journey even. So this is for you, even if you don't even have pregnancy on your radar just yet, because quite often when people want to get pregnant, they want to get pregnant now and they don't want to wait. So I think the more processing emotional work you can do, the better you're going to set yourself up for pregnancy. Maybe even if the pregnancies don't happen, miscarriages, abortions that you might decide to do, it just sets you up for making decisions and navigating the challenges that come with any path that you choose. So, yeah, I would love for you to be able to access being able to process your emotions, because it is a challenging thing to make the decision for me to work with someone whilst they're pregnant. I have done this, but I've really, really screened people to make sure that they're going to hold themselves very responsible. I have to hold myself responsible for the states that I'm going to possibly put people in as well. So anyway, go have a listen to that podcast. Yeah, so I had done a level of emotional processing in myself. I was in a pretty good space, but my health wasn't. So we did decide that before we conceived or tried to conceive a baby, that we wanted to be in the best mind space possible. And this is where my Vipassana Experience podcast comes into play, and I talk a little bit about this. So in short, Gav had done a number of Vipassana meditation courses, and he introduced me to it. And so we decided that if we were going to conceive a baby, it would be straight after a Vipassana course, because we both knew that we felt pretty good in our headspace and in our bodies after sitting these 10-day meditation courses. And we know a lot, and a lot of people out there, you listening, know the concepts of how the mother feels and how stress gets passed on to the baby. And so we wanted all the good feeling thoughts and the best energy possible to give Violet this best possible start to life. So we had intended, and I don't know the years and the times, it must have been around 2013, 2012 and 13. No, it was 2013 in September, I believe, and planned to sit a Vipassana course together. I've actually only ever done them with Gav, but I'm not interested in trying to like subliminally communicate with him. And then the plan was to try and conceive in the October. And I remember going to that Vipassana course, and if any of you have listened to one of the very first podcasts that I did, it's about my pain story. And skin is my weak spot. And when I was at my worst with my health, I was covered in cystic acne on my face, my back, my chest, rushes, hives, triggering an autoimmune condition where I had really stiff ankles. I was getting sick, but my weak spot is my skin, and it psychologically consumed me. Sometimes it was physically painful. So I had been on the journey of trying to fix this, and I remember thinking, if all I have to do is meditate for 2 hours a day, which is Vipassana, an hour in the morning, an hour at night, I will do this if it fixes my skin. Now, I already can hear my words and know that that is the wrong mentality. It wasn't about that. Nothing could fix it. From the external sense, and even meditation was the external sort of thing that I was looking for. So I did feel a lot better about my skin coming out of Vipassana. And whenever I see people who are just in a kerfuffle with life and they don't know what direction they're heading in, I'm like, you should go sit a Vipassana. 10 days on your own, in your head. It's not appropriate for everyone, but you will know that all the answers are within you. So I did feel better about my skin. I remember not looking in the mirror for the 10 days. I just couldn't face my skin. But that's a bit of a disconnection, right? So I felt better about myself. But the answer I got when I came out of Vipassana, instead of let's conceive a baby, is I'm not ready yet. And I need to do some practical work around really helping my health right now. So it was 2011, 12, 13, over summers that I went to Brisbane. If you listen to the pain story, you'll hear all the ins and outs, but that's when my health was really bad, the worst it's ever been, sick after sick after sick, in all of its various forms. And I now understand all the messages that those sicknesses had to tell me. And it's been a really beautiful message, but quite the journey. And I was in real external fix-it mode. However, I then decided to reach out to my dear friend, Helen Patteran, which I know that a lot of people who follow me also follow Helen Patteran. She's such a good friend. We've known each other since the early days of us practicing. We met in Wellington, and I often call her Violet's third parent because she was so involved and so, she's just been an amazing part of my life and a very inspiring part of my life. So I was a practicing herbalist, but I'm a very symptomatic prescribing herbalist. And I think it's really important as practitioners that we seek out external support from people who are not necessarily emotionally attached to our journey, because sometimes we can't see what we can't see when we're in our pain, which is very much what I was in. So the big answer I got from Vipassana was, it's not the time to conceive a baby, it's time to work on my health. Now, having been a herbalist, I also know that a lot of the herbs that you take for skin, I had a lot of systemic candida, thrush issues going on. I was a long history of being on the pill. I was on Roaccutane, not for many years by that point, but I kind of wanted to reset my body. I knew that I was taking those things from the wrong place in the past. But the herbs that you take to help balance your gut and reset everything and detoxify, they're just too strong to take whilst you're pregnant. And a lot of herbs, we're just in this day and age where you can't test on pregnant women the safety of these herbs. And then, of course, there's breastfeeding, which you might decide to do for 6 months, 1 year, 2 years. And then what if you decide to have another baby? And so sometimes the treatment, if you want to take the natural route or the medicated route, that can be a drawn-out process. If you decide to have 4 or 5 kids, it could be 10 or 15 years before you ever get to treat yourself. And so this makes me think right now, as I say this, is I very much come from a mentality of look after yourself first before you have energy to give out to anyone else. And this cliche saying goes for everything and anything in life. We hear the cliche saying around love yourself and then you can love others, have money for yourself and then you can give to others, but look after your health first and then you can provide more for others. I strongly believe in this. In where I'm at in life right now, I just see everything as one, and analogies are there to explain everything and anything in life. So yeah, if I wanted to do these diets and I wanted to cleanse my body and reset it, it's better to put off this pregnancy. I think I was 28 at the time, maybe 29, I can't remember. And I decided I'm going to go hard at it for 6 months. So this was a period of time where I do also acknowledge that if I look back at the diets I was doing, which were self-prescribed diets, not by Helen, is that I was very controlling with my diet, which links back to stored emotions, etc. Anyway, so I was guided by the beautiful Helen. I had some pretty strong herbal mixes and I followed a diet, and I was really focused and dedicated to getting pregnant. So therefore, I didn't want to prolong this. I was going to be very disciplined with this 6 months of clearing my body and helping it. And so the herbs and the diet really did help clear my skin. I was also back in New Zealand. For those of you who have heard my pain story, environment and climate is a huge part of it. So coming back to Wanaka, I was in Tekapo at the time. It's a drier climate than the hot, humid Brisbane. And my skin improves naturally because of that. But the herbs did take it to another level. Then what I would say is actually post-pregnancy, my skin did break out again. The next level of me clearing my skin, if you're watching the YouTube version of this, the video version, is it really was the emotional work, speaking my truth, not having this internal, external world boundary, not caring about what other people think of me, and just sharing what was coming through me. And that continues to evolve and that continues to grow. So I'm not saying it was all the herbs. It was a huge part, but herbs, I still see people bypass and externalize with like, I'm doing all the natural stuff. I think if you can combine, then that's where the key is. And that's why I share my stories, because I did those things. And that's why I do the deeper emotional processing work with people, is because I know that those things are still external fixes, even if they're natural. Okay. So yeah, I got through the 6 months. It was pretty amazing. I remember having what's called a Herxheimer reaction, if you look that up, where my body was probably detoxing and shedding toxins a little bit faster than what my body could handle. So I remember breaking out in what looked like a rash that was like measles. I had this massive like butterfly pattern all over my back. It was coming up my neck. And of course, skin was my weak spot. And me being a very pitta, dosha type constitution is like, go hard, go in there. So I like strong stuff. I like to get in, and sometimes I learn the hard lessons. So anyway, I had a Herxheimer reaction. I had to take a lot of charcoal to like mop everything up and then just step it back a little bit and then build up. So yeah, that was amazing. And all of my like systemic thrush issues, candida issues cleared. I felt really good in my body. And I stuck with this for 6 months. And I was on a vegan diet at this point in time. And I did continue a vegan diet throughout pregnancy. When I had Violet and realized my skin wasn't breaking out, I did go to town with dairy. Thank you, hormones. So yeah, I got through the 6 months, and I really look back and know that I was very disciplined with it. And I see that sticking to that commitment moved me through the process much faster. And then I remember it was January that we tried to get pregnant. I hadn't done Vipassana just before. I'd done Vipassana a few months prior, and then, or 6 months prior, I made that decision. Actually, so some of the memory is a little bit lost. I actually think that I did that diet and the herbs for about 3 or 4 months. Yeah, because it was the year that Goenka died. If everyone knows about Vipassana, I went and sat this course in September, and when we came out, the guy who has been amazing for spreading the word about Vipassana and is the guy on the discourses on the videos, he passed away when we came out of Vipassana. So that was September, must have been 2013. And then decided like December, January that we would try and get pregnant. And it happened pretty easily. So I would have been 29 at this point. And I was keeping up, I'm pretty sure, with Vipassana meditation practices. So like an hour in the morning, an hour in the evening. I don't think I was working very much at this point. I was kind of in holiday mode. I was doing a lot of locums where I'd work 6 months of the year and then I would have 6 months off hanging out with Gav. We would either go traveling or he would do his guiding work. And I think I was studying herbal medicine at that time because I was one of those people that couldn't do nothing with my time back then. So yeah, the pregnancy happened really easily. I actually wonder if I did conceive around December and I had an incredibly heavy period that I thought, oh gosh, I wonder if this is like a little miscarriage, but I never looked into it. And then got pregnant in January. And I already had intentions, and Gav and I had already discussed about, well, if we do get pregnant, how do we want this pregnancy to be? How do I want this pregnancy to be? And how do we want the birth to go as well? And so I really communicated my needs and wants. And this is a big part of what I teach is know what you need, know what you want and desire, and communicate this. And thankfully, we were on the same page. So I'll give you a little brief because this is all about the preconception journey. Discussions with your partner is really huge. Don't wait until you get pregnant and think that you can manipulate your partner into what it is you want. So I knew that I wanted to have an intervention-free pregnancy. I didn't want lots of tests, prodding, blood tests, etc. I wanted to have a pregnancy that was a home birth. I wanted to have a lotus birth. And that was inspired by my beautiful friend, Anne Williams. So Helen, Anne and I were all good friends in Wellington. Anne is now, she's a beautiful birth support and a doula. And she inspired me because she had, at that time, had one birth that was no intervention. She had a home birth and she had a lotus birth. And this is why I love sharing this story, because I wouldn't have known what the hell lotus birth was unless Anne had told me. I was like, what? You keep the placenta attached? Anyway, we'll go through that more when I talk about the birth in part 3. But yes, lotus birth is where you keep the placenta attached. And I was like, oh, that sits really nice with me. I think I want to do that. So I communicated all of this with Gav. He was on board. He's not a fearful person. But this would have been the time, well before we even conceived, to have these conversations to make sure, you know, what is it that we need to work out rather than bring all the stress onto the baby. So communication is key. Relationships is key as well. And communicating within your relationships is what brings it all together. So then fell pregnant in January. And by the way, September, October, apparently, well, in the Southern Hemisphere, what is it, spring? September and October apparently is the busiest time for midwives. And I guess for most people, they fall pregnant, not necessarily planned, because January is when a lot of people are in holiday mode. They've met their deadlines and they're just cruising. There's also Valentine's Day around February. So I wonder if that is why. It's summer, sunshine, people are feeling good, less stressed. So what the next part was interesting, and why I was trawling the internet a lot, is because we had a 6-week holiday planned to go to South America. Gav was meant to do a climbing trip. That didn't happen, so we went ourselves anyway. And to go to France, and I think we went to Switzerland. We ended up in a few places in Europe, but it was meant to be a 6-week climbing trip, skiing trip, and holiday. So the things that I was trying to look for on the internet, and hopefully now this is something that I can provide, heads up, as a source of inspiration, you need to take responsibility for the choices that you make. Maybe that's why people don't put this information out on the internet. We were meant to be climbing at altitude. So up to, I believe, 6,000 meters, just easy trekking, but everything, like a lot of things, are at altitude compared to what they are here in New Zealand. Camping, hiking in South America, skiing. I really loved my saunas as well. Those were a big part of me helping my skin. So I would talk to a lot of people, and I would try and research things on the internet, like people skiing at altitude, people climbing at altitude whilst pregnant. And I could barely find anything. I think I found one blog post, but it didn't really go into a lot of detail. So I know myself really well, and I know that I would have looked into these things and just simply used them as a source of inspiration. Not that if anything went wrong, that I would vilify this person for putting this information on the internet. So again, I'm just giving you a real heads up, a warning when you listen to this, is that I'm sharing this and I hope that it reaches some people that need to hear it, but I want you to take responsibility. This is what I teach, is you've got to know within yourself whether or not it's right to do these things, not because I did it. Never do it just because I did it. So at the end of the day, I did have to tune into my body and decide, what do I want to do? So I didn't actually know I was pregnant at the time. I was just going to wait until I had missed a period. And I remember at altitude, I'd never really been at altitude above 3,000 meters. So we were camping at like 5,000, and I remember trying to walk and not really knowing, is this altitude or is it something else? And actually pregnancy wasn't even on my radar then. But I remember waking up in the middle of the night, and again, like we always find reasons. I was very hungry. I was eating like packets of biscuits in the middle of the night, but I didn't know if it was altitude. Am I not sleeping because of the altitude? Am I out of breath because of the altitude or something else? Anyway, so we then just continued in South America and still ate out, still did all those things. And then where did we go? You probably want to know, where did we go? Gosh, I'm terrible. Gav usually organizes all this stuff. Actually, I can't even tell you where we went in South America. I know we went to Mendoza, but we also went into the mountains so that we could do all this hiking. Then we found ourselves in Europe, went to France, and I'm pretty sure we went to Switzerland as well, and Belgium too, to visit some of Gav's friends. We went to Ireland as well. Did we not? Okay. Doesn't matter. It's the details. Anyway, Gav picked up some signs of like, I think you're pregnant before I actually confirmed the test. I was like, oh, I'm just going to wait. And it was funny because we stayed with some friends in France, and actually this guy who was no longer on the physical plane actually said to us, are you pregnant? Before I even knew. So that was a bit bizarre. Very tuned in person. And then I got sick and I had a cough, and I was still skiing. It's like skiing was my addiction. I was obsessed with it. I loved it. Probably a little bit like if you're following my journey now, I absolutely love my horse Tilly and horse riding. So I have a very addictive nature, and skiing was a thing, and there's no way I wasn't going to do it. So I skied. I remember getting sick and having this really annoying cough. And that is a really common sign when people get pregnant, because the immune system lowers, that you get some sort of sickness. Not always the case, but I did experience this. And then I did the pregnancy test and I was pregnant, and I've still kept that stick. While it's actually more curious as to how I didn't wee on my hand when I peed on the stick. And yeah, I was like, holy cow, I'm pregnant. Okay, well, that perhaps explains why I was so hungry and why I couldn't like meet Gav and walk and hike up with him to 6,000 meters. I just chilled out in the tent. But yeah, I'm pregnant. So we just continued our journey. Actually, I have to admit, so we were in Switzerland. We stayed in an Airbnb. And what's that thing? Is it fondue? I think it is the cheese fondue, where you like cook your cheese and eat potatoes and all that kind of stuff. And raw cheese is a thing over there. So I gave in. And also, you know, there's things like don't eat raw cheese. And yes, there are real risks, listeria, sushi, etc. But I've met a number of mums who are like, stuff it, I was eating it. And some of you would go, why would you do that? That's crazy, that risk. But anyway, I did eat raw cheese. And yes, I traveled to South America whilst I was potentially pregnant. But this is where I come from. It's like I want to do what I want to do. And yes, there are risks involved. And I assess all of these things in my head, and I decide whether or not I take responsibility. And of course, there can be judgment casted, but oh well. Yeah, so we kept on traveling through, and actually, if I go back a step, is that I do remember, and I'm just going to be fully transparent and honest. I usually only share this in my groups, but this was when I was younger, that I thought, you know, if I found out if there was anything wrong with a baby, that I would not continue with the pregnancy. Now, I share this because this is something that, a real thing that I coach my clients on, the ones who are working with me on their fertility journey, is the guilt that sometimes they've got that thought, that feeling. But that was when I was a teen that I had that. It's like, well, you know, if I knew, what would I do? And it wouldn't be a choice to keep the baby. I grew over many years, and Vipassana had a huge impact in my life. And I then came to the place of, you know, everything that we experience, everything that we're served, everything that we cross paths with, every person we cross paths with in interaction is for a purpose, and there is a deeper message there if we're willing to look at it. So I then changed my mind to, well, whatever baby I am given, whatever baby I'm served, disabilities, special needs, whatnot, I'm going to trust and I'll work it out. But this baby is meant to be here on this earth. So I will deal with whatever's served to me. So there was part of, I guess, jumping forwards now after that, coming back from Europe. And then I think I took myself over to Tassie to do a locum. Tasmania, Australia, is that my pregnancy, and I'm going to kind of cut this because this is really stage 2, but or part 2 of the podcast, is that I didn't want to have any ultrasounds. I didn't want to have any tests. And I actually didn't meet up with my midwife that much. So actually now I realize I'm going into part 2. So I wanted to share that this is part 1. This is all about my preconception journey and some of the conversations that I had with Gav. I guess if I recap for you, is that I didn't want to work on my health after I had the child. I wanted to work on my health beforehand. Now, I know that I was 29, and some of you might be in your 30s or 40s, and I meet a lot of women who are like, time's running out. And yes, that can be true for some of you, but sometimes this is just a thought that's implanted. My mum had me when she was 45. I've worked with women well into their 40s around pregnancy as well. And these are things and thoughts and emotions and feelings that they've got to navigate and process and work through. So, the earlier that I can deliver this information to you, the better, because even when I meet women who want to work on their fertility journey with me from an emotional perspective, and I tell them, I really advise that you don't get pregnant within the 3 months that we're working together, that they're resistant. And then months later, I still find out that they're not pregnant. And I do believe that this emotional processing work is like a huge missing link for a lot of people. I don't bypass and say it's the only thing that you can do. It's so individual. There are some people who are still working with their doctors, some still working with their naturopaths. But yeah, I work with a lot of women who are just like, I'm at a loss. I've got a lot of trauma from these losses, or the fact that I haven't gotten pregnant yet. I've got to do work through what I've been told by practitioners, therapists, etc., that I've seen. So it's not one size fits all for the fertility journey, but sometimes I sit there and I can watch, or I'll see them on social media and I'm like, okay, well, where are you at? Have you come to peace with this journey, or are you still trying? Are you still externalizing some of these really expensive modalities? All right. So yeah, work on my health first, especially from the herbal front. Just because it's herbal and natural doesn't mean it's necessarily safe during pregnancy, and there's a lot of untested stuff. I am a big believer in the more you can process on an emotional level, especially if you are very aware that you have got traumas that involve stored emotions in your body that you have not processed. If you can do this before you get pregnant, great. It is not too late for those of you who already had babies or multiple babies. I just think it is easier. That is not necessarily to say that you will sail through pregnancy and having kids or multiple kids, because each step of the way, pregnancy has hormones involved in it that can make you more vulnerable to these emotions and traumas coming to the surface. And then once you have kids, we cross paths with our children for a reason. They can trigger the hell out of us, and relationship dynamics can change. And so there's a whole bunch of new stuff to work through. My thing is that if you know how to process your emotions, if you know how to communicate within your relationships, not just your intimate relationships, but relationships with anyone in life, is that you will always know that you can navigate through the challenges that are inevitable as you walk the path. So herbs, health, state of mind. I don't recommend Vipassana for everyone, but if it's something, and now this is the 10th time you're hearing it, maybe it's a message for you to go and explore it. If you want, you can listen to my Vipassana experience. My experience is going to be completely different to yours. I loved it, and I did go on to do 2 Vipassana courses whilst I was pregnant. One when I was 16 weeks and I just did the 3-day because I'd already decided the 10-day. And then I did a 10-day about 10 days before I had Violet. So I was 36 weeks pregnant at that time. And there was another pregnant woman in that Vipassana course, and we actually had the same midwife. 2 very different experiences, but both, I think, quite positive experiences. So yeah, Vipassana for me is one of the most pivotal things that I've done in my life. And it was something that Gav and I made a conscious decision that we were going to do it before we got pregnant. But then through that space and that clarity, I worked out that I needed to work on myself first, and he respected that. And then going into the preconception journey, I was vegan. I did change my herbs and supplements on recommendation from Helen, my naturopath friend, Violet's third parent. And I already knew how I wanted things to go through the pregnancy up through to the birth, and not a lot of that changed along the journey. This is the way my brain operates with lots of things in my life. Conversations with your partner, the conversations I had with Gav around, well, how do I want the pregnancy to go? How do I want the birth to go? And making sure we were aligned and on the same page. And then a big part, as I said, is what did I do during pregnancy? Now, I am the type of person that I know myself well, and I will always go and do things because they feel right for me. But yeah, I wanted to go skiing. I wanted to go to South America. I wanted to climb at altitude. It was easy. It was like hiking. It wasn't mountaineering, climbing, or rock climbing or anything like that. Actually, I did continue to rock climb as well. And I will have some tips on that for anyone who wants to rock climb, because I was given a warning and I didn't listen. What else? Yeah, skiing. I want to let you know I ate raw cheese during that time. And yes, it could have been a risk. And constantly throughout this, especially when people found out I was pregnant, and then I was visibly pregnant, which was more around 30 weeks that I was visibly pregnant, depending on the clothes I wore, I would hear all sorts of things from people that I had to filter out. So why I love the emotional work, which is first and foremost what I teach people, is that it's helped get me grounded in myself, to trust my decisions, to trust my intuition, and to not be wavered or take things personally when someone else is projecting their own pain or their own opinions on me. So I'm pretty sure that's my preconception journey. It got pushed out a few months. I was 29. I was 30 I was 29 when I had Violet as well. I turned 30 a couple of months later. And yes, she is our only child, and that's probably another thing that I could go into. I'll decide where to drop that. She will be our only child. And yeah, it's been a really, really amazing journey. It's something that I look back on, and I'm very proud of how I navigated that. I am so grateful for friends like Helen and Anne for sharing their inspirational stories, like Helen and the support that she's given other pregnant women. So grateful that I've attracted her into my life and that she was able to support me the way that she did. And for Anne, for showing me, like, she's been through massive transformations, for showing me the births and sharing with me the home birth and the lotus birth that she had, because I wouldn't have known about it. I've shared this with some of my patients in the past, and yeah, I'll talk about it really openly when I did workshops to let people know that this is how you can have a baby. And really, I teach a lot of people and patients and clients how to advocate for themselves and just to speak up for what they want, have discussions. Again, communication, relationships, not just with your intimate relationships, but with your practitioners, your team. And yeah, with pregnancy, I'll talk about finding my midwife, because that was a little bit of a interview process, and it wasn't about just choosing anyone. It was about finding someone who was aligned and trusting that that person is out there. So this is part 1, my preconception journey with Violet, who is now 8. Part 2 is going to be about the pregnancy. I'm going to talk about a letter that I had to write to my parents, or felt like I had to write to my parents. And then part 3 is the birth of Violet, which was a painless birth, a lotus birth, and it was at my parents' house. And I didn't want them to see her for the first 48 hours. So that's what the letter was about. And it was quite interesting. So I hope you've enjoyed this. I hope you get something out of it. And if you feel called to, then listen to parts 2 and part 3 of my pregnancy, birth, and beyond journey. Okay, bye.